Hello, my name's Lesley Atherton, and this is my short story called Benefits and Buses. Callie woke that morning, her skin cold and head pounding. For 3 or 4 seconds after waking, she experienced peace, despite the debilitating chill. But once the realization of who and where she was had imprinted itself on her drowsy mind, she shivered, just as she had every single day since she'd moved to this place, and since she'd been lost in the midst of all this madness. Since terror had transformed, thank the Lord, into numbed misery, and later into half-alive acceptance. When she moved in, she'd been told the tale of the previous tenant and how he'd been scraped from Callie's kitchen floor. Apparently the clothes had been cut from his sweat and blood-encrusted torso, a body desiccated and emaciated with poverty. The floorboards he'd laid on had been replaced, but Callie could still feel him, smell him, and even see him sometimes when the telly was off. That meant that the telly had to stay on at all times, and that was why she had to get out every day, just to breathe. It was a Wednesday morning and a shopping trip was required, but this didn't involve a supermarket trolley and unlimited available cash on her credit card. It involved an on-foot trip to a local mini-mart, and Callie's internal dialogue would inevitably progress along these lines. How much are those biscuits? 47p. That's going to leave me with, only £1.46. That's not enough for the tea bags and the carton of milk, and I need something for dinner too. But if I don't have the biscuits and milk and tea, it still doesn't leave much for dinner, and I'd get such a headache without tea. I have enough problems without getting another headache. I've got £1.93 to last me till tomorrow, and there's no food in the cupboards. That's only one of my problems. Oh, wait a minute. The sausages are cheap. They go out of date today. But that means they're less than half price. Okay, so it look nasty, but they'll fill me up if I add a tin of beans. And I've just got enough money, have I? Oh, just to get that tiny pack of tea bags too. No milk in my tea, but there'll be no withdrawal headaches, so I can deal with using a couple of scoops of Coffee Mate. Oh, I just remembered. No Coffee Mate. Damn black tea then. That was Callie on Wednesday and on every other day. Shopping completed, she took her basket to the counter, easily carrying its paltry contents. Nowadays she only shopped in mini-marts. Of course the prices were a little higher than supermarkets, but they knew her in most of the local shops, and sometimes she managed to steel herself to ask for credit when she was more than usually desperate. She also quite liked the guy behind the counter of this shop. He was Turkish, cheeky, good-looking too. Once he felt sorry for her and how she was losing so much weight, and gave her an out-of-date cream cake for nothing. It was only 1 day stale and didn't even make her ill. It was a massive treat, as she never had the money for stuff like that anymore. "All right, love," the Turkish guy said, with a smile at Callie. She handed him the basket. "Sausages and beans," he said. "Good stuff. Get yourself some chips, and that's an awesome dinner." She didn't tell him that she didn't have another £1.50 to buy his big bag of potatoes, or that she was used to better things, and that she was sick of this life, and sick of debt and struggling to make do. She didn't tell him that all she wanted was a job, a good job like she used to have, and a life like she used to have, and friends and family like she used to have. She didn't tell him because she wanted to keep their relationship clean and fresh and unsullied. She wanted to ask if he'd sell her a couple of potatoes, but she didn't. She tried to smile at him and reply to his comments, but he was busying himself with bagging up her food. Callie knew she wasn't much to look at, just a far too skinny young woman with pockmarked skin and scruffy clothes, a piggy bank scrounger who paid for every evening meal in coppers and silver. She was a woman who was not allowed a credit card, who could not get an overdraft, and who was unlikely ever to be offered a job. She was a woman who was sinking. But Callie still couldn't understand how and why and when it all happened. Surely this life was assigned to her in error, having been clearly intended for someone else. As she stumbled past the bus stop, she heard 2 young and well-dressed schoolgirls laugh. "Skanky cow," one said to the other. "Yeah, how can people let themselves get into such a state?" One day, not so long ago, Callie knew that she would have been just like those girls, with her life's path glittering ahead of her. She would have spoken as they did, because she knew no better. But she knew now. She knew the people who got themselves into such a state. They were any people, And all people, they were the woman over there and that man with the baseball hat, the woman with the fake pearls and blue eyeshadow, and the bus driver with the dark sagging eyes. It just took one mistake, one chink in your armour or one deviation from the usual, and there you were, well on the path to being broken. We are all one bad decision away from destitution or from the skanky cow state. Callie's bad decision wasn't alcoholism or drugs, it was crime, and the crime was someone else's. Her brother, John, had been arrested for a serious business fraud, and she, convinced by him of his innocence, vowed to do all she could to keep him out of prison. Of course, this meant that she used all her money, lost her house, and eventually lost her job. It would have been worth it had her endeavours been successful, but John, realising her stash of cash was obliterated, immediately admitted his guilt. Callie, like many women, had committed no offence other than attaching herself to the wrong horse, and she didn't even get any thanks for her multiple sacrifices. John had sniggered at the prospect of her bankruptcy. He'd told her it was her own fault that things had gone wrong, and that she'd trusted an untrustworthy person when she should really have known better. It was only then, once she'd moved to the flat, which still bore traces of its desiccated previous tenant, that she realised just how much she'd lost. Callie had managed to ignore the girls and to shuffle speedily from their giggling to continue her walk home. As she limped past, she stared up at the sky and willed herself to forget that her shoes were leaking and that the insole was wearing out, imprinting the inner heel's waffle pattern onto the base of her foot. The sky was always there, and was always a comfort. It was always waiting for her to look up, costing nothing and expecting nothing. Her kind of friend, the only kind of friend she still had, now that she'd become rooted in the murky and gelatinous earth of this place. Callie tried to ignore a group of hooded lads. They jeered a little, but their attention was caught by another group of boys. She swerved to her right, avoiding both groups. It was a shortcut, but a dangerous route, and you needed your wits about you. She sighed as she walked. She speeded up. She needed to get out of the alleyway, just as she needed to get out of the estate. But how could anyone improve and escape in a place like this, where everything was designed to drag you down with it? How could she study in a house that was only warm in the summer, but even then was too warm because the windows were nailed shut? She once tried to remove the nails with a strip of metal she found in the street, but she just got her hands covered in black slime. That summed up the estate. Mould and slime and water puddles. And how could she be who she should be in such a place of unforgiving contrasts? The block of flats where she lived was mainly too loud, with neighbours yelling drunkenly at each other at 11 at night. Yet at 8 in the morning, life there was quiet as a tomb. How could she escape? How could she move on? How could life change? Callie thought about it, but came up with nothing. All she could think of were benefits and buses. Benefits and buses.